The house was silent, except for the muffled thrum of music and the occasional roar of laughter that drifted up from the soundproofed game room below. The marble floor beneath Amara Carter's bare feet felt like ice, though sweat clung to her skin in sticky rivulets. Another contraction ripped through her body, sharp and merciless, stealing her breath until she staggered against the polished banister for support. It was 3 in the morning, and her life was unraveling on the staircase of a mansion that had never once felt like home. She had been awake since midnight, timing the surges, counting the minutes between each tightening wave. They had grown closer, faster, more brutal, until fear wrapped itself around her like a vice. She had begged Marcus to listen, to come upstairs, to see that their child wasn't waiting for convenience. But Marcus, surrounded by cigars, whiskey, and the intoxicating glow of wealth, had brushed her off with a sneer. "First babies take forever. Stop being dramatic, Amara." Then he'd closed the heavy door to his game room, sealing himself off from her cries. Pain split her again, so fierce it painted her vision with white-hot stars. She gasped, lowering herself to her knees, clutching her belly as if her hands could hold the world together. She thought of the pristine nursery upstairs, with its imported crib, the designer rocking chair Evelyn had insisted on buying, the rows of unworn baby clothes neatly folded in gilded drawers. None of it mattered now. None of the luxury could disguise how utterly alone she was. Her trembling fingers searched blindly for her phone. The bright screen blurred as she scrolled through her contacts, trying Serena again, her best friend, her anchor. But Serena was deep in another double shift at the hospital. No answer. Amara's sob tore from her throat as she pressed Marcus's number. Downstairs, faintly, she heard Town. He ringing of his phone. He didn't pick up. He wouldn't pick up. The next contraction struck with punishing force, knocking the phone from her hand. She scrambled to retrieve it, tears clouding her eyes. She couldn't think, couldn't breathe. Desperation guided her thumb across the glowing screen. She meant to call Serena once more, but the haze of agony betrayed her. She tapped the wrong name, not even noticing the error until her message was already sent. "Please help me. I'm in labor and completely alone. 2847 Magnolia Drive. Please, I'm terrified." Her head sagged against the cold banister as she hit send. Maybe the message would disappear into the void. Maybe she had texted a stranger, a number that would never reply. Or maybe, just maybe, someone would hear her, even if it wasn't the person she intended. Her body trembled as she tried to pull herself upright. From below came Marcus's voice, loud and triumphant, toasting success with his friends. She could almost hear the clinking of crystal glasses, the laughter, the careless arrogance that had defined her life since marrying him. It was bitterly ironic. 3 years earlier, she had been a woman of fire, running her own design studio, a woman whose art meant something. Now she was reduced to crawling across a marble staircase, praying for mercy while her husband drowned in whiskey. Her phone buzzed. The sound was small, almost lost in the cavernous hall, but to Amara it was thunder. With shaking hands, she swiped the screen. "Who is this? I got your message. Are you safe? I'm on my way." The words burned into her mind. A stranger, unknown, faceless, had read her plea and chosen not to delete it, not to ignore it, but to answer. For the first time that night, Amara felt the faint flicker of hope. Somewhere out there, in the darkness of Atlanta, someone was coming. Someone she hadn't asked for. Someone she didn't even know. The next contraction tore through her, pulling her into the storm again, but this time she gritted her teeth and held on to one fragile thought. She wasn't entirely invisible. Somewhere, footsteps had already begun to move toward her. The city was still cloaked in midnight silence when Gideon Solace leaned back in his leather chair, eyes scanning the blueprints spread across his desk. He had spent the evening reviewing plans for a new community center in one of Atlanta's forgotten neighborhoods, a project he insisted on funding himself, despite his board questioning the return on investment. To Gideon, the return was never about profit. It was about dignity, about giving families the opportunities his mother had been denied. The buzzing of his phone broke the quiet. At first, he thought it was another late-night update from one of his project managers, but when he picked it up, he froze. The words on his screen were raw with panic. Please help me. I'm in labor and completely alone. 2847, Magnolia Drive. Please, I'm terrified. For a long second, Gideon just stared, his heartbeat thundering in his ears. It had to be a mistake, a wrong number. Magnolia Drive was one of the most exclusive neighborhoods in the city, filled with sprawling estates where wealth was meant to protect against desperation. Yet desperation pulsed from every letter of that message. He tried calling back, but there was no answer. He typed a quick reply. Are you safe? I am on my way. Then without hesitation, he grabbed his keys and strode out of his office. The streets were empty at that hour, the traffic lights blinking yellow through the misty dark. Gideon drove like a man possessed, his mind flashing with memories of his childhood. He could still see his mother, fragile with illness, pacing their small kitchen at 2 a.m. as she prayed for help that never came. He could still hear the neighbors ignoring their pleas, because poverty was easier to overlook than to confront. That night had carved something permanent into his heart. If he ever had the power to stop someone from being abandoned, he would never turn away. Meanwhile, inside the mansion on Magnolia Drive, Amara struggled to push herself toward the front door. Her nightgown clung to her skin, her hair damp with sweat, her body trembling under the force of contractions that came closer and closer together. She could hear Marcus' laughter through the floorboards as he toasted his friends in the game room. Her fist pounded weakly against the doorframe, but no one came. She thought of Malik, the tiny heartbeat inside her, and fear twisted into determination. She had to survive. For him. The sound of tires crunching against gravel reached her ears. At first, she thought she was imagining it. Then headlights swept across the grand windows, illuminating the marble foyer. Her phone buzzed again. I am outside. My name is Gideon. I am here to help. Amara's hands shook as she reached for the lock. When the heavy door creaked open, a tall figure stood on the porch. He wore a dark suit, rumpled from hours of work, but his eyes were sharp and full of concern. He dropped to his knees beside her without hesitation. How far apart are your contractions? He asked, his voice calm but urgent. Amara tried to answer, but another contraction ripped through her, forcing a scream from her throat. Gideon caught her before she could collapse, lifting her into his arms as if she weighed nothing. For the first time in months, she felt safe, protected in the embrace of someone who didn't ask questions, didn't criticize, didn't dismiss her pain. We are going to the hospital right now, Gideon said firmly as he carried her across the cold stone steps. I will not let anything happen to you or your baby. As his car roared into the night, Amara clutched his shirt and whispered a single word through her tears. Thank you. She didn't know who this man was or why fate had brought him to her door, but one truth burned. Through the chaos, a stranger cared more for her life than the man who had sworn to love her forever. The hospital's fluorescent lights glared down like unblinking eyes as Amara was rushed through the sliding doors in Gideon's arms. Nurses converged instantly, voices sharp and urgent, but Amara could barely hear them over the roar of her own pulse. Her grip on Gideon's shirt was desperate, as though letting go of him would mean losing the only anchor she had left. He did not flinch, did not set her down until the medical staff insisted. Even then, he stayed close, his steady presence cutting through the chaos like a shield. Her body was drenched in sweat, her hair clinging to her forehead, every contraction tearing through her with merciless force. Yet her mind screamed with more than pain. What if something went wrong? What if Marcus never even knew she was fighting for her life? What if her child entered the world only to find himself unwanted by the very man who should have been there first? Gideon walked beside the gurney as they wheeled her down the corridor, his stride firm and unwavering. He had faced cutthroat negotiations, million-dollar deals, entire boards of directors lined up against him, but none of that compared to this moment. A woman's life and the life of her unborn child rested in the fragile space between breaths, and for reasons he could not yet explain, Gideon felt as though both lives belonged to him to protect. The delivery room smelled faintly of antiseptic and urgency. A doctor introduced herself with brisk efficiency, checking vitals, issuing instructions. Amara cried out as another contraction gripped her, and Gideon instinctively reached for her hand. Her fingers squeezed his so tightly that his knuckles turned white, but he didn't move, didn't wince, only leaned closer and murmured, "You are not alone. You will get through this." The hours blurred into a battlefield. Amara's body arched with pain, her cries echoing against sterile walls. Doctors and nurses moved like soldiers, their focus absolute, but whenever her strength faltered, her eyes sought Gideon's. He never faltered. He whispered stories of his mother's resilience, of how she had fought every day with nothing but courage in her hands. He told her she had the same fire, that she was stronger than she knew. At last, the room exploded into shouts that were half command, half celebration. A wail filled the air, thin and fierce and full of life. The sound broke Amara open, her body collapsed against the pillows, her chest heaving, tears streaming as the nurse placed a tiny, wriggling bundle against her chest. Malik, her son. His skin was soft and warm, his cries loud enough to shatter the silence that had haunted her for months. Amara kissed his damp forehead, her whole body trembling. She wanted to believe it was over, that the storm had finally passed. But her relief was short-lived. The delivery room door slammed open, rattling against the wall. Marcus stumbled inside, his shirt rumpled, the stink of whiskey still clinging to him, his eyes locked on Gideon standing near the bed, his expression dark with fury. "What the hell is happening here?" Marcus demanded, his voice sharp enough to cut through the tender moment. His gaze darted from Amara cradling their newborn to Gideon standing protectively at her side. Who is this man, and why is he holding himself like he belongs here? The fragile calm shattered into shards. Amara's heart lurched as she realized the real battle was only beginning, and this one would test more than her body. It would test her very soul. The doctor's voice was still issuing calm instructions when the tension in the delivery room shifted like a knife twisting in the air. Marcus's presence filled the space with something heavier than the scent of alcohol on his breath. His eyes were red with rage, his tie askew, his expensive watch glinting under the harsh lights as though mocking the life Amara had just fought to bring into the world. Amara clutched Malik closer to her chest, her body aching, her mind torn between exhaustion and terror. She wanted this moment to be hers alone, the quiet miracle of a new life, but Marcus's voice stole it from her. "What is he doing here?" His words lashed across the room, aimed at Gideon, who stood rooted at her bedside, calm but unyielding. Gideon did not flinch. His gaze remained steady, his posture firm, his presence as immovable as stone. "She needed help," Gideon answered evenly. "I found her alone and in danger. If I had not come, she and the baby might not have made it to this hospital." The words seemed to strike Marcus harder than any physical blow. His jaw clenched and his fists tightened as though he wanted to throw more than accusations. But the nurses formed a quiet barrier around Amara, focusing on checking the baby's vitals, ignoring Marcus's bluster. The doctor herself shot him a sharp look and ordered him to stand aside. "This mother just gave birth. She needs quiet, not shouting." Marcus sneered but stepped back, his glare never leaving Gideon. Amara's heart pounded. For the first time she saw the true shape of Marcus's anger. It was not fear of losing her, it was fury at losing control. When the chaos settled, Marcus leaned close enough for only Amara to hear. His whisper was venom. "Do not think this changes anything. You are mine. You and that child are both mine." Amara's throat tightened. She wanted to scream, to hurl back all the words she had swallowed over the year. "Ours." But her strength was wrapped around Malik, and her silence was broken only by tears that slid down her cheeks. She looked past Marcus to Gideon, who met her gaze with something steady and unspoken, a promise that she was not as trapped as she believed. Later that night, when the room had emptied and Marcus had stormed off to call Evelyn, Amara lay awake with Malik nestled against her chest. The monitors beeped softly, the hospital air cold against her skin. Gideon remained in the corner, silent, watchful. She did not know why a stranger would stay when he had no obligation, but she felt safer knowing he had not walked away. She whispered into the quiet, "Thank you, Gideon." He looked up from the chair, his eyes softened. "You don't need to thank me. You needed someone, and I was there. That's all." But Amara felt it was more. She felt the shift inside her, the first flicker of something she hadn't known in years. Hope. Hope that the wrong number she dialed was not a mistake at all, but the first thread of a lifeline pulling her towards something she had long thought impossible, a chance at freedom and maybe a chance at love. The weeks that followed blurred into restless nights and long days, but the glow of Malik's tiny heartbeat kept Amara moving when her body begged to collapse. She poured herself into caring for her son, but beneath the lullabies and the warm weight of him in her arms, a storm was brewing. Marcus grew colder with every passing day. His smiles were rehearsed, his gestures mechanical, and when he thought no one was watching, the mask slipped to reveal a man cracking under the weight of his own secrets. One evening, long after the house had gone quiet, Amara stirred at the sound of paper tearing. She slipped from her bed and padded barefoot down the hallway. The glow from Marcus's study spilled beneath the heavy oak door. She pushed it open an inch and froze. Marcus knelt on the floor, surrounded by shredded documents, his hands moving frantically as though destroying evidence. His phone lit up beside him, messages flashing across the screen. She caught only a few words from the glowing text: debt overdue. Final notice. Her breath caught in her throat. The marble empire Marcus paraded before the world was crumbling beneath his feet. He wasn't the powerful provider he pretended to be. He was drowning, and he was determined no one would see him fall. The next morning, Amara's suspicions were confirmed when two men in tailored suits arrived at the gate. Their smiles were sharp, their voices laced with menace as they demanded to speak with Marcus. She watched from the nursery window as her husband stepped outside, his body stiff, his voice lowered. One of the men jabbed a finger into Marcus's chest before handing him a slim envelope. Marcus's face blanched, his hand trembling as he signed whatever paper they shoved at him. That night, Evelyn appeared unannounced. She swept into the mansion like a storm cloud draped in pearls, her perfume thick and suffocating. Amara sat in the living room, Malik asleep in her arms, while Evelyn's icy eyes raked over her. "Marcus is under pressure," she said flatly. "You need to stand by him," but then her lips curved into a cold smile. "And remember, dear, you signed a prenup. You have nothing without this marriage. Nothing." Amara's heart lurched. A prenup. She had never signed one. She was certain of it. Yet Evelyn laid a folder on the coffee table, flipping it open to reveal her name scrawled across the bottom of a contract. Her hands shook as she reached for the paper. The signature looked like hers, but something was wrong. The ink was faded, the strokes uneven, like a forgery crafted in the shadows. Evelyn leaned closer, her voice soft but poisonous. "If you ever think about leaving Marcus or taking the child, remember the courts will see this document. They will say you agreed. They will say everything belongs to him." Amara sat frozen, fury and fear twisting inside her. Malik stirred softly against her chest, and she pressed him tighter, her resolve hardening. For the first time, she understood the trap she had been forced into. The mansion was not her home. It was a cage built from lies, wealth, and signatures she had never made. But deep within her, beneath the fear, a flame flickered. She remembered Gideon's steady eyes, the way he had carried her when no one else came. She remembered his words, "You are not alone." The storm was closing in, but Amara knew she could not stay silent. She had survived the night of Malik's birth. She could survive this too, and this time she would not only survive, she would fight. Rain fell in thin silver sheets against the wide windows of the nursery, the steady patter a haunting lullaby. Amara sat in the rocking chair with Malik curled against her chest, his soft breaths warm against her skin. The storm outside mirrored the storm inside her heart. Every corner of the mansion now felt dangerous, every shadow another secret Marcus and Evelyn could twist into chains. That night, Malik began to cry with a sharp, piercing sound that made Amara's chest tighten in panic. She tried to calm him, rocking him, singing softly, but his cries only grew louder, his tiny body trembling. Fear gripped her throat. What if something was wrong? What if Marcus refused to help again? Her phone shook in her hands. She scrolled past Marcus's name without hesitation and pressed the one contact she never expected to lean on: Gideon. The line rang only once before his voice answered calm and steady. "I am on my way. Stay with him, Amara." Minutes later, headlights cut through the rain outside. The doorbell chimed and Gideon appeared, soaked to the skin, holding a small bag in his hand. He didn't hesitate. didn't question, just moved past the marble hall into the nursery where Amara sat trembling. He handed her the special formula his doctors kept for emergencies. His fingers brushed hers lightly as he passed the bottle, and for a fleeting moment, she felt her world steady. As Malik quieted, Gideon pulled a chair closer. His dark hair clung wet to his forehead, but his gaze was sharp with concern. "Tell me the truth, Amara. What is happening here?" Her lips trembled. Words she had buried for years tumbled out. She told him about Marcus's temper, about Evelyn's threats, about the fraudulent prenup that stole her freedom. She confessed how her designs had been taken, sold under Marcus's name, her creativity twisted into another weapon of control. By the time she finished, her tears had de-soaked the blanket in her lap. Gideon leaned forward, his voice low but fierce. "You are not property, Amara. You are not his cage bird. You are stronger than the chains they forged around you." Her eyes met his, and in that moment, the walls she had built cracked. She whispered, "I don't know how to fight them. I don't even know where to start." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a card. A name gleamed across it. Nora Vance, one of the most formidable attorneys in the city. Gideon placed it in her hand. "You start by speaking the truth, and you won't be alone in this fight." Before Amara could answer, footsteps thundered on the staircase. Marcus's voice sliced through the silence. "Who the hell is here at this hour?" The nursery door flew open and Marcus appeared, his face twisted with rage. His eyes darted to Gideon, then to Amara holding the lawyer's card. For the first time, Marcus looked cornered, like a predator sensing the trap closing in. The tension thickened until even the rain seemed to hush. Marcus's voice dropped into a dangerous growl. "You think you can steal what's mine? You think you can turn her against me?" Gideon rose slowly to his feet, his tall frame casting a shadow across the nursery. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Some things are not yours to claim, Marcus, and soon you'll learn exactly what that means." Amara's heart pounded. She realized this night was not just a rescue, it was a declaration. The war for her freedom had officially begun. The next morning, the mansion no longer felt like stone and glass. It felt like a fortress of enemies closing in. Amara woke to find Marcus standing at the foot of her bed, his arms folded, his eyes cold, with a fury that chilled her blood. In his hand was a stack of papers, crisp and cruel. "Custody arrangements," he said flatly. His voice carried no warmth, no hesitation, only venom. "You will sign these, or you will never see Malik without my permission." Her heart lurched. She reached for her son's crib, but Marcus stepped between them, blocking her view. She could hear Malik's soft breaths behind him, but Marcus's presence turned those gentle sounds into daggers. Amara forced her voice to stay calm. "What are you doing, Marcus? You can't take him from me." His lips twisted into a smirk. Evelyn stood in the doorway, her pearls gleaming like shackles. "You forget, dear," she said with mock sweetness. "The courts see what we show them, and what we have shows you are unstable, reckless, unfit." Amara's pulse pounded as Evelyn slid a photograph across the bed. It showed Gideon holding her hand in the hospital, his expression protective, his presence undeniable. Evelyn's voice sharpened like a knife. "The judge will see a mother running to strange men in the middle of the night. They will see scandal. They will see betrayal." Tears burned Amara's eyes. She knew what they were doing, twisting truth into poison, turning her lifeline into a weapon. Her fingers trembled as she pushed the papers away. "I will not sign this." Marcus slammed his hand against the wall so hard the frame rattled. His whisper was lethal, "Then prepare to lose everything." That night, Amara sat alone in the nursery, the house silent except for Malik's soft cries. Her body shook, but not with fear, with something new rising from the ashes of her despair. Resolve, she reached for her phone, not for Marcus, not for Serena, but for the card Gideon had given her. "Nora Vance." The line clicked and a firm voice answered. Amara poured out her story. Every shadow, every chain, every forged document and stolen design. Nora listened without interruption, her silence heavy with calculation. At last she spoke. "Come to my office tomorrow morning. Bring every scrap of paper you can find. Do not let them intimidate you. You have more power than you think." When Amara ended the call, she felt her breath steady for the first time in months. The weight of the mansion's walls pressed in on her, but she knew now those walls could crack. Malik stirred in his crib, and Amara bent to kiss his forehead, whispering a vow. You will not grow up in chains. I will not let them take you. Outside the window, Marcus's car pulled into the driveway, his headlights slicing through the night. But this time, Amara did not shrink back. This time she stood taller, clutching her son against her chest. For the first time, she was not just surviving, she was preparing to fight. The courthouse loomed like a fortress of judgment, its stone pillars rising against the morning sky as though daring anyone who entered to bring their truth inside. Amara clutched Malik's blanket in her hands, her knuckles white as she walked through the echoing halls. Gideon was beside her, his presence steady like a wall against the storm. Nora Vance swept ahead, her heels clicking with sharp precision, each step a declaration that they were not here to beg, but to fight. Inside the courtroom, Marcus sat with Evelyn at his side, their lawyer a sharp-eyed man who wore arrogance like armor. Marcus's expression was smug, his hands clasped as if victory was already sealed. He glanced at Amara with a cruel smile, as though reminding her she was still his prisoner. The judge entered, and the proceedings began. Marcus's lawyer wasted no time. He painted Amara as unstable, a woman too emotional to care for her child. He flashed the photograph of Gideon at her hospital bedside, twisting compassion into scandal. He claimed Amara sought attention from strangers instead of her husband, that she had endangered her son with reckless choices. Each lie struck like a lash against her skin. Amara's chest tightened, her throat closing with shame. But then Nora rose, and the tide shifted. She dismantled every accusation with evidence sharp and irrefutable. She revealed financial records showing Marcus's debts hidden beneath layers of false accounts. She laid out proof of Amara's stolen design sketches sold under Marcus's name, deals signed in his hand that bore her creativity. The courtroom murmured as the truth unfolded piece by piece until the portrait of Marcus the provider cracked into shards. Gideon took the stand, his voice calm and unshaken. He told the court how he had received Amara's desperate message, how he found her abandoned, how he carried her through the night to save her and her child. He did not speak of love or judgment, only truth, and the truth glowed like fire against Marcus's darkness. Marcus's lawyer scrambled, bringing in witnesses who faltered under Nora's questioning. A psychiatrist claimed Amara was unstable, but admitted under pressure he had never once examined her. Evelyn tried to testify, but her venom turned to ash when Nora produced evidence of her role in forging the prenup. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Evelyn's pearls rattled as her hands shook with rage. By afternoon, the air was thick with suspense. The judge listened in silence, her eyes sharp, her expression unreadable. Finally, she raised a hand for quiet and spoke. I will consider the evidence overnight and deliver my ruling in the morning. A collective breath shuddered through the room. Marcus's glare burned into Amara as they left the chamber, his whisper a hiss only she could hear. This is not over. You cannot win against me. But outside in the cool air, Amara felt something she hadn't felt in years. She looked at Gideon, at Nora, at Malik safe in her arms, and realized the truth. For the first time, she wasn't walking alone into the darkness, and that gave her the strength to believe the impossible might just be within reach. The fight was not finished, but hope had already begun to win. Morning light spilled through the tall courthouse windows, painting the floor in fractured gold. The air was heavy with anticipation, every seat filled with onlookers whispering about the scandal of a wealthy husband and the fragile wife daring to defy him. Amara sat at the plaintiff's table, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Malik was safe at home with Serena, but she could still feel his heartbeat echoing in her chest. Today, everything would be decided. Marcus entered with Evelyn at his side, both dressed in polished arrogance. His eyes locked on Amara, and for the first time she saw something beneath the smugness, a flicker of desperation. He knew what was at stake. His empire, his reputation, his control, all balanced on the words of one judge. When Judge Wren took her seat, the room silenced instantly. She shuffled her notes slowly, deliberately, making every second stretch like a blade across raw nerves. At last her voice filled the chamber, firm and clear. I have reviewed the evidence. The accusations against Amara Carter are unfounded. The documents presented by the defense were fraudulent. The testimony of their witnesses unreliable. Gasps erupted across the room. Evelyn's hand shot to her pearls, her face paling. Marcus stiffened his jaw, clenching so tightly a vein throbbed at his temple. The judge continued. Amara. Carter is granted full custody of her son, Malik Orion Carter. Marcus Carter will be referred to the district attorney for investigation into fraud, forgery, and financial misconduct. The words struck like thunder. Amara felt her breath break into sobs of relief, tears flooding her vision. Gideon's hand closed gently over hers, grounding her as the weight of years lifted from her shoulders. For the first time, she was free. But Marcus was not finished. He leaned across the table, his whisper sharp and venomous. You think you've won, Amara? But I promise this story isn't. Act over. I will destroy you before I let you go. Security escorted him from the room, but his words clung to her skin like poison. Evelyn followed her son, her face twisted in fury, spitting threats of appeals and vengeance. Yet their voices faded behind the slamming doors, and for the first time, silence felt safe. Reporters swarmed the courthouse steps, cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward, shouting questions. Amara shielded her face, but Gideon stepped in front of her, his arm protective, his voice calm as he told them no comment. The world wanted a spectacle, but this was not their victory to consume. It belonged to Amara alone. Later that evening, Amara stood in the quiet of the nursery, Malik sleeping peacefully in his crib. She traced her fingers over his tiny hand, whispering a promise of a future free of chains. The fear Marcus had sown into her life was not gone, but it no longer owned her. She had faced the darkness and walked through it alive. Behind her, Gideon's voice was low and steady. You fought for him, Amara. You fought for yourself, and you won. She turned to him, her eyes shimmering with gratitude, and something deeper, a spark that frightened and thrilled her all at once. Perhaps the wrong text that night had not been wrong at all. Perhaps fate had written a new beginning through trembling fingers on a phone screen. But in the shadows of the city, Marcus nursed his defeat, his mind already twisting with schemes. And though Amara had won the battle, the war he promised was still waiting in the dark. 6 months later, the world outside Amara's window looked brighter than she remembered. The mansion was gone, the cage of marble and glass replaced by a modest townhouse filled with laughter and light. Malik's tiny feet pattered across the hardwood floors, his giggles chasing shadows from the corners. Each morning, Amara opened the curtains wide, breathing in the sunlight as though it were her first taste of freedom. But the scars of her old life had not faded completely. Marcus had been indicted on multiple counts of fraud and forgery, his empire collapsing like sand beneath a tide. Evelyn had fled the city, her name whispered only in courtrooms and gossip columns. Yet Amara lived with the memory of Marcus's final words outside the courthouse, his vow that it wasn't over. She knew men like him did not let go easily. Every night she double-checked the locks every time her phone buzzed, her chest tightened with dread. Still hope had begun to bloom. With Gideon's help, she had opened a studio, Solace Creative, named in honor of the man who had once answered her desperate text. It was more than a business, it was a lifeline. She poured her designs into campaigns for nonprofits and small businesses, mothers fighting for custody shelters, rebuilding lives. Each project was a step toward healing, each client a reminder that her pain had given birth to purpose. One evening, as autumn settled over the city, Amara stood in her studio, watching the soft glow of lights dance across her sketches. Gideon entered quietly, carrying Malik in his arms, the child's sleepy head resting against his shoulder. Gideon's presence filled the room with the same steady calm that had carried her through the darkest nights. He set Malik gently in his crib, then turned to Amara, his expression unreadable. I need to tell you something. Gideon said, his voice low but certain. The night you texted me, I thought it was a mistake. But the truth is, I don't believe it was. I believe it was fate. I believe it was the moment that led me to you. Amara's breath caught her hands trembling over the sketches on her desk. Gideon stepped closer, his eyes unwavering. I admire your strength, Amara. You fought through fear, through betrayal, through every chain they wrapped around you, and you did it not just for Malik, but for yourself. That is the woman I have fallen in love with. Tears welled in her eyes, but they were not born of sorrow. They were the release of years of silence. She whispered, I thought love was just another trap. I thought it was another cage. But with you it feels like freedom. He reached for her hand, lifting it to his lips, his touch reverent. "Then let it be freedom," Gideon said. "Let it be the life you were meant to have." In that moment, Amara realized the story that began with a wrong number had never been a mistake. It had been the call that shattered her prison, the spark that set her free. She leaned into Gideon, her heart no longer trembling with fear, but beating with certainty. As Malik stirred in his crib and the city lights shimmered beyond the window, Amara knew her life had been rewritten. Marcus's threats belonged to the past. Evelyn's shadows could not touch her anymore. The future was hers to claim, built not on chains, but on choices, not on fear, but on love. The wrong text had led her to the right man, and from that night forward, Amara Carter vowed never again to whisper for help into the darkness. She had found her answer, her strength, her forever in the arms of the man who showed up when no one else would.